Uh, Recording started.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I call the meeting to order and Capital Campus Design Advisory Committee meeting to order and welcome committee members and guests in attendance today. Reminder, today's meeting is being held remotely and is being recorded. Before beginning the agenda, I'd like to invite all the CDAC members to introduce themselves. First of all, I'm Dan Miles, Chair of CDAC this year. Chris?
And Chris Jones, Vice Chair and Landscape Architect.
Randy?
Randy Bolerjack, Deputy Secretary of State, representing Secretary of State Steve Hobbs.
Representative Dolan.
I'm Lori Dolan, 22nd State Rep.
And Representative McIntyre.
Representative McIntyre from the 19th Legislative District.
Have we had any other members jump on?
Yeah, Senator Hunt is there.
Senator Hunt, are you there?
He is trying to promote him now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just promoted him, so it should be good.
I got a promotion. I'm here. Senator Hunt from Olympia.
I've been waiting for you to get that promotion.
Great,
Hey,
thank
thanks,
you, Senator
Representative
Hunt.
Dolan.
Is Senator Fortunato able to attend today, or do we know?
He is not in the attendee list, no.
Okay. And I understood Alex Reluda may have a conflict and is excused. And I don't know Mark Daly's status. Is he in the waiting room by chance?
I do not see him. No.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. I'd at this point like to request enterprise staff to introduce themselves.
This is Bill Frary. I'm the Assistant Director for Facility Professional Services at the Department of Enterprise Services.
Oliver Wu, Senior Project Manager at Enterprise Services under the PPD team.
Ann Larson, Director of Government Relations.
Clarissa Easton, LCM Project Director.
And good morning, I'm Tara Smith, the Director of DES.
Hello, I'm Brent Chapman, the Horticulturalist and Grounds Property Manager for the Capitol Campus.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Is that all of the DES staff that are attending today's meeting?
There's one more, just saw him. Matt Jones will also be doing one of the presentations, and I just promoted him.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. As you know, we have a busy agenda today, which includes a few items requiring committee action. The purpose of today's meeting is for approval of the CDAC February 17th, 2022 meeting minutes, East Campus Pollinator Garden update, Legislative Campus Modernization update, and Executive Residence Security Improvements update. A public comment period has also been reserved as part of today's meeting. During our dedicated time, the public will be invited to offer verbal public comments. Enterprise Services staff will also summarize any additional public comments received via email during this period, or may elect to summarize the comments received for a specific agenda item following the presentation. The minutes for CDAC's February 17th, 2022 meeting were included in your meeting packets. Excuse me, this is agenda item number 2, approval of minutes. We did include the minutes in your meeting packet. I hope you all had a chance to read them. Please state if there are any errors or clarifications necessary to these minutes.
Dan,
Senator Hunt.
I found a couple that I sent in to Bill, but just technical. On page 3, Mr. Alst, I think, should be referring to a migration plan or mitigation plan rather than a migration plan, or either way. And on page 5, Secretary Hobbs is referred to as Secretary Dobbs. And then one recommendation I would have on the minutes, it lists late arriving members as just late arriving. I wonder in the future if we could list late arriving in the time. So if somebody gets there at 10:30, that's a little different than getting here at 11:15, for instance.
I think that's a great idea, and we will do that in the future, Senator Hunt.
Thank you for that suggestion, Senator Hunt. I agree. That's a great idea.
And I sent the language, the corrections to Bill too, so he's got them in writing.
Okay, I also had 2 small clerical issues I wanted to offer. Same paragraph that Senator Hunt referred to on page 3, 3rd line. I believe it should read American with an N at the end rather than America, as in American neoclassical design. And on the final paragraph on page 3, the first sentence should be altered to read Opportunity Site 6 rather than Opportunity 6. And I can send those in writing, Bill, if that's helpful.
I think we got him.
Okay. So any other modifications to the minutes? Hearing none, can I call a motion to approve the minutes as modified?
So
And
moved.
I,
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. Agenda item 3, the public comment period. CDAC will provide up to 15 minutes for public testimony at today's meeting. The instructions for how members of the public may provide testimony are as follows. Individuals may provide verbal testimony for up to 2 minutes at the sole discretion of the CDAC chair. Individuals requesting to provide testimony are requested to type their first and last name in the Zoom webinar Q&A window. First and last name in the Zoom webinar Q&A window. The CDAC chair will recognize individuals by name using the list provided in the Zoom webinar Q&A window. DES staff will request the recognized individual to act and unmute their own microphone using Zoom features. Failure to be recognized, or excuse me, failure by a recognized individual to unmute their microphone in a timely manner may forfeit the opportunity to provide testimony. Forfeiture will be at the discretion of the CDAC chair. Following completion of an individual's testimony, DES staff will clear the individual's name from the Zoom webinar Q&A window and will mute or turn off the individual's microphone for the duration of the CDAC meeting. Let's begin.
Okay.
All right, we have Rachel Newman, who has asked to make a public statement.
Great, Rachel?
Hello, good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to read my statement or our statement. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on the status of New House Replacement Project. For the record, my name is Rachel Newman, and I am speaking on behalf of the South Capitol Neighborhood Association. Throughout the LCM process, we have appreciated the series of stakeholder meetings that DES has sponsored in an effort to seek input from us and other interested groups. As you know, we have invested significant time and energy to respond thoughtfully and constructively, both at those meetings and before CDAC and the State Capitol Committee. Unfortunately, many of the concerns and suggestions we have raised have not been addressed. We continue to advocate strongly that the LCM project embrace and support the Olmsted vision and the Capitol Campus Master Plan. To this end, we were pleased that DES took steps to meet with a representative of Olmsted Parks, who are steeped in knowledge and understanding of Olmsted principles of design. For a project of this scope and importance, we stress the value and necessity to utilize formal peer review in this process moving forward. This level of expertise is necessary for the campus landscape, buildings, and historic preservation. It is our understanding that the SEPA checklist is nearing finalization, and we look forward to responding to the department's findings. As this project evolves, we hope that the project executive team, DES, CDAC, and SCC will keep an open mind to options that arise, and that there will be more opportunities for a problem-solving stakeholder format that encourages dialogue rather than one-way communication. This worked well for the Pritchard renovation and the Deschutes Estuary projects, and we continue to encourage the department to use this same approach for Newhouse replacement project, a project of this magnitude and importance to Capitol Campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newman. Bill, do we have any other individuals signed up for public testimony?
No others signed up for testimony.
Okay, thank you. As a reminder, the public was invited to submit comments via email to Enterprise Services by 4 p.m. on the day prior to this meeting. These comments were provided to the committee prior to today's meeting. And as I recall, Bill, there were none. Is that correct, or were there some?
There were no public comments received by DES for this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Where comments relate to a specific agenda item, Enterprise Services will offer comments following presentation of the item and prior to discussions by the committee for consideration. But since there were none, we will not be doing that. Any other public testimony or comments? Having heard none, I guess we'll move to agenda item number 4, the East Capitol Campus Pollinator Garden. At this point, I'd like to invite Brett Chapman, Enterprise Services, to provide an update on the East Capitol Campus Pollinator Garden.
Thank you, Chair Miles, and Oliver, if you could bring up the PowerPoint. So thank you for including time on your agenda this morning for Department of Enterprise Services and Building Grounds to provide an update on the new Capitol Campus Pollinator Garden. Next. So this is located on East Campus, but it's representing the entire Capitol Campus in this effort. So last year, or 2021, the legislature passed a bill to improve efforts across the state of Washington for pollinator habitat and for the education of Washington citizens on the importance of pollinators. Just for example, 70% of our food crops across the world rely on healthy, vital pollinator organisms for successful pollination. And probably the best example of that is all of our Eastern Washington agricultural crops. Fruit crops are a specific example that rely on pollinators. So shortly after the legislative session in 2021, representatives from the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington State Department of Agriculture, and the Office of Governor approached the Department of Enterprise Services to see about the possibility of installing an educational demonstration pollinator garden on the Capitol campus. So I'm pleased to share this morning that that effort is in full effort and progress, and I'll provide some updates starting with the next slide. So the purpose of this new Capitol Campus Pollinator Garden is to develop, install, maintain, and promote a pollinator garden on the Washington State Capitol campus in Olympia, Washington. And the focus of this pollinator garden will be invertebrate pollinators and communicating how to support their diverse habitat needs to tenants, visitors, and the general public that visit the Capitol campus. Next slide. Super exciting. This is a very collaborative effort between multiple agencies and private industries in the state of Washington. Those include the Washington State Department of Enterprise Services, which is responsible for the care and custody of the Capitol campus, the Office of the Governor, the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, Washington State Department of Agriculture. The Woodland Park Zoo has been a tremendous partner. We'll see more of their efforts here shortly. Zero Society is an international nonprofit dedicated to the development and education of pollinator habitat across the world. And then also local tribes, the Squaxin Island, the Nisqually, and Chehalis provided input on some of the interpretation of the habitat and this garden. So the project location it's for the whole campus, but it's actually located on East Campus. And if to get orientated, if you look in the very background, you can see the Employment Security Building. To the right, you can see all the international flags surrounding the Korean War Memorial. So we're actually on top of the 14th Avenue Tunnel that goes from off I-5 onto the main campus. And we call that the lid. And there were 8 existing concrete planters formed in a formal circle. This is a beautiful location for a pollinator garden because of its exposure to full sun. The raised beds make really nice ADA accessibility. And DS actually offers 7 different potential locations across East and West Campus to the people that approached us. And this was the site that was chosen by the Department of Fish and Wildlife and other members of the pollinator committee. Very exposed for good habitat, very accessible to the public. Next slide. And the project funding. So the state legislature provided approximately $53,000 in funding during the most recent legislative session in 2022 for the installation and initial maintenance of this pollinator garden, which is being installed and maintained by DES buildings and ground staff. Next slide. So this project started late winter, early spring. There was existing soil in these planters, but we wanted to make sure we had the best soil possible. So much of the existing soil was excavated and removed from these raised concrete planters. Next slide. And then we brought in a custom soil mix. This was actually developed by a local vendor south of Tumwater. And because we have weight restrictions on top of this parking garage and lid, we have some pumice, all that or volcanic rock as a component. We have organic compost. And then speaking to the partnership, Woodland Park Zoo has Zoo-Doo, they call it. It's composted manure from a lot of the zoo animals. So we have organic Zoo-Doo integrated into this custom mix as well. And here you can see some of the building and ground staff bringing in the new soil. You might also notice a white PVC irrigation pipe, and we reconfigured the irrigation system to make sure that all the new plants were going to be watered adequately going forward. And then I took some slides last week of the staff actually planting. About 95% of the plants were installed into this new space last week. A combination of woody plants, herbaceous perennials, annuals. All of them have been vetted by the Fish and Wildlife pollinator wildlife biologists to make sure they're appropriate for the pollinator species. And then this is some example of the Woodland Park Zoo collaboration. So they've had a pollinator garden at the Woodland Park Zoo in Seattle for many years. So they definitely know what has worked and not worked for a public demonstration garden. So they guide us in plant selection. But their graphic designer has come up with 8 different interpretive signs. I mentioned there's 8 different raised planters. Each of these raised planters has a different theme that we're using for education and demonstration. And so here's just an example of one of the interpretive signs. They're going to be 16 by 19 inches. They'll be installed at a 45-degree angle for easy viewing. And then in today's modern interpretation world, we can't put tons of information on each of these signs. So we're going to have a QR code that will take us to some shared web pages between the Department of Enterprise Services, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Agriculture, Woodland Park Zoo, so people can get much more information about pollinators, pollinator habitat, how to start their own pollinator garden in their home yard or their business, whoever may be visiting the garden. So 8 different planters, 8 different themes, 8 different interpretive signs. Next slide. And then the Department of Enterprise Services and the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife are working on a public open house for this new educational demonstration, Pollinator Garden. We're targeting the third week of June, June 20th to the 26th, which is National Pollinator Week. This open house ultimately revolves around Governor Inslee's availability. So we're still waiting to hear back from the governor's office on his availability. So the week may shift based on his availability. So we certainly will get the word out to as many constituents as possible about this open house. But if it's not the third week in June, it'll be shortly thereafter, sometime early summer. So thank you very much for letting me introduce you to the progress on the new Capitol Campus Pollinator Garden, and I'll certainly do my best to answer any questions you might have this morning.
Thank you, Brent. Having heard that there are no public comments received via email or via public testimony today, I'd like to move on to committee discussion. So Chris, it looks like your hand is up.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Mr. Chapman, for the presentation. I was curious. I applaud the efforts, and I think it's really exciting to start bringing in pollinators to the Capitol campus. I'm curious, on slide, I believe it was 6, mentions initial maintenance for the garden. Is there any plans or discussion about future maintenance and management of those planters, either with your team or potentially engaging the community and kind of the long-term maintenance and viability of those planters?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Mr. Jones. So yeah, the maintenance will be ongoing by buildings and ground staff. We'll have to have further discussions with our partners on, the funding for the maintenance is really secure for about 2 years, additional funding for the extra time it'll take staff to maintain this new garden. So we haven't really flushed out the long-term funding. It'll certainly be part of embedded into our normal routine for the buildings and ground staff. And if East Campus doesn't have the capacity, we will certainly bring in gardeners from other parts of campus. It's like we need to do planting the new annuals every spring. If that requires extra help, we can certainly shift resources to make that happen.
Yeah, that's great. It'd be a really fun elementary school project if that was ever an opportunity to engage students in something like that.
Yeah, that's certainly, certainly the goal, that we have field trips from elementary schools. We're not quite sure how we might integrate this into other campus tours that come to learn about the legislative process and tour the beautiful legislative building. So all those opportunities will be developed as we move forward. But it's certainly for everybody, but I appreciate the focus on our younger citizens of the state of Washington and getting them super excited and more informed about pollinators and pollinator habitat.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate it.
Senator Hunt, your hand is up.
Thank you. I'm just curious, the governor in the last several years has had a couple hives of bees at the residence. Is DES doing anything to make sure we have some good pollinator plants? I know this is within range of the bees, but making sure we have some good plants and blossoms, pollinators around the governor's mansion and the rest of the Capitol campus?
Yeah, thank you, Senator Hunt. So even though this is a very specifically identified pollinator garden, the whole Capitol campus is really a pollinator garden, to be honest. As you may know, we recently renovated the Sunken Garden on West Campus, and that is full of perennial blooming flowers and annuals. And we're in the process of planting over 5,000 annuals on West Campus now around our memorials and south of the legislative building. So those provide habitat. And probably the most exciting thing, and this is actually part of the bill that was passed in 2021, is 25% of new landscapes where appropriate need to provide for pollinator habitat. So I won't get ahead of the LCM project that's going to report out here shortly, but just for example, Senator Hunt, that new landscape around the new Newhouse building and the new, the extension of the Pritchard building, at least 25% of that habitat, new landscape, will be habitat specifically for local pollinators, and we rely on our native plants to provide that rich habitat. So not only do we have a lot of embedded pollinator plants already on campus, but we're even elevated focus as we bring new plantings onto campus, either for new buildings or for new landscape development, that we integrate as many pollinator plants as possible. So I would just reiterate that the whole campus is technically a pollinator garden. These new planter beds are really just getting the focus for a specific demonstration educational garden. Did that answer your question, Senator Hunt?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chapman. Representative Dolan, do you have a question or a comment next?
I have probably both. First of all, Brent, this is a absolutely delightful presentation. Thank you. You know, there's a lot of us who are really worried about our bees, care about our bees, but actually don't know that much about our bees. And so the first grade teacher part of me is curious, is part of the signage, is there a sign that kind of tells people how they can make their own pollinator garden in their own yard, like kind of listing the plants that are the best? Because I think there's a lot of people that if they just had that one signage would take cell phone pictures of it and go home and buy those plants, and we could do all sorts of good with all the thousands of people that come to the Capitol campus if they all took pictures of that and went and bought those flowers and planted them in their own yards.
Right, you're spot on. So I mentioned there's 8 different planters. They're going to have 8 different themes with 8 different interpretive signs. So for one example, one of the themes is soil. What kind of soil might you need for your pollinator garden? Another theme is exactly as you mentioned, some recommended plants for local pollinators. And then another interpretive sign is particularly focused on prairie habitat and prairie pollinators, and that's where our Native American tribes have helped us with some interpretive language, particularly for the prairie habitat. So there's going to be information to address everything that you mentioned on these 8 interpretive signs, but it's the real deep information is going to be available from these QR codes that are going to direct people to web pages that are really going to be focused on more how-to guides and more exhaustive plant lists, for example, that you mentioned. So we really want to get people interested with these signs and getting some basic information and increase their curiosity, and then lead them to technology on web pages for more in-depth information. So we're really using both the tangible and the virtual methods for education.
That's great. I think right now the world seems so hopeless in so much of the information we get, that to have something easy that we could all do to make it a better place for bees would feel really good. And I think a lot of people will appreciate the work you've done. Thank you so much.
And I didn't mention it, 3 or 4 years ago, the East Campus ground staff installed some mason bee houses and populated some mason bees. And it turns out that they're actually right next door to this new pollinator garden. So that work that the East Campus ground staff started with our native mason bees 3 or 4 years ago will certainly be benefiting from these new pollinator plants as well. So I kept neutral when they were deciding where they wanted the location on campus from these 7 choices, but I was very pleased that it ended up being right next to where we had already started a mason bee project a few years back.
Great.
All right, well, thank you, Brent, for a great presentation. This is an exciting project. And it'll be fun to share it with the public as it gets up and the plants start blooming. And maybe they already are, I don't know. But,
yeah, we have a few, and certainly be on the lookout for an invitation for the open house later this spring or this summer.
Great, thank you very much. A reminder, this is an informational item only. There's no action by CDAC at today's meeting on this item. And thank you, Enterprise Services and the folks, Brent and his team, for providing the committee with a status update. We'll move to the next agenda item at this point, item 5, which is the Legislative Campus Modernization Project update. I'd like to invite Clarissa Easton from DES, and I believe Christine is here in lieu of Ruth. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And Brent Hoffman is here. Brent Anderson from Hoffman Construction is here as well. So the 3 of us we'll be sharing updates primarily about Newhouse. Mr. Miles.
Great. Thank you, Clarissa. Please feel free to take it away.
Oliver, would you advance to my next slide? So I'm just going to share an overview. I want to take, since I have the floor right now, I want to acknowledge publicly the inspiration it has been to work with DES Building and Grounds, particularly Brent Chapman and his colleagues, as we've started to scope and examine, investigate the possibilities for extending the Olmsted legacy in our landscape. Brent, it's just been such a boon to the LCM to have you on board helping us navigate and consider all those plant options that we've talked about so far. So kudos to you and your staff. Let them know that many of us in DES are very grateful for that. I also want to acknowledge Rachel Newman, who's always a very strong conscience talking to us as we make progress on the legislative campus modernization. Rachel, the peer review panel is very important. We've heard both the director and my assistant director confirm that we need that going. I'm leaning heavily on Brent Chapman. I want to quote his phrase of minutes ago about B&G's care and custody of the Capitol campus landscape. He's working with us. He used the phrase peer review panel often. We're soliciting volunteers for that landscape peer review panel right now, Rachel, and design development will be starting very soon. So hopefully we hope to have those volunteers on board to lend steady hands on the tiller as we continue to look at Olmsted legacy, taking it and stewarding it into the future. Oliver, the next slide, I think it elucidates some of the recent progress we've made on the LCM. City of Olympia building permits for the modular were issued. We have those in hand. Our GCCM partner Hoffman, namely Brett Anderson, is with us today. They're mobilizing. I believe all that starts on the executive residence parking lot on May 23rd. So it's right around the corner. There's been tireless coordination to maintain safety and convenience access as required, both by employees, visitors, and tradespeople who are going to be coming to the site. Rachel is correct. The SEPA, the non-project SEPA checklist has been underway. We took a pause to coordinate with the DES parking work group. We want to make sure that all groups who are working on parking have the same information, that we're on the same page. Hopefully you're all thrilled with us that we're beginning our AE selection on the Pritchard, it's a combined project, the Pritchard rehabilitation expansion and that interior renovation of 2 floors of O'Brien that will go a long way, I believe, in decompressing the congestion, the overcrowding on those floors. I've got a chart later on in a slide that shows you the actual dates, and we do these PowerPoints quite a ways in the future. So I want to acknowledge to all of you publicly that we rescheduled that May 25th because I just hadn't gotten the responses from our landscape architects. I've reached out for more help in finding volunteers of landscape architects who really have a working knowledge of maintaining and extending Olmsted legacy on a very valuable, precious campus, such as the one we're blessed with here in Olympia. Next slide, Oliver. So this is to which I alluded. We have a very firm schedule for the AE selection on the Pritchard O'Brien project. Our statement of qualifications for that second LCM project are due next Wednesday, the 25th, where we've targeted interviews by the middle of June. Proviso requires that we have the AE selected by September 1st. So we're hustling on that. Our project budget, I noticed we tagged in here to remind everyone, is about at the 119 million. Next slide. We've been energetically working as well on all the draft documents to bring our GCCM partner on board, so that we have, as many of you know from discussions of alternative public works, we need that three-legged arrangement of owner, architect, and GCCM to really wring all of the benefit from that delivery method. So as Hoffman has shouldered a good deal of the work through schematic design on Newhouse, we're looking for a partner like that on the combined Pritchard and O'Brien project. We intend to advertise that, initiating that process on June 1st. So these next 30 days are busy. You can see by scanning to the bottom of that schedule, we hope to have them under contract in October so that schematic design will begin late November, early December for Pritchard and O'Brien together. Next slide, Oliver, thank you. We've been working through some financial challenges on the Newhouse project. No secret, I'm sure, from those of you who are exposed a lot to capital programs. These are extraordinary times. The escalation has been very difficult across the entire Pacific Northwest and the country. So we've tried to remain flexible. We've diligently looked at every option to make that 64.5 million for the construction costs on Newhouse. And I'm confident with Miller Hall and Hoffman that we will achieve a beautiful project with that budget. I wanted to mention, I didn't have this on the talking points. I'm sure some of you are very keen to know that our public art process, which is being led by Mike Sweeney of Arts WA, it has been underway. I believe that advertisement, the solicitation for artist involvement on Newhouse will be published by the end of this week, which is tomorrow, I guess. So we're hopeful to have a well-integrated art presence of local art in the building or the site or the landscape. So Brent has even talked with us about that, integrating signage, artistic pieces in the landscape. So I like to share with some of the mentees I work with, some of the young architectural candidates, that this kind of work in the public sector really makes us into human spider webs, if you will, because we emulate biomimicry across all of architecture, engineering, landscape, and art, all of this. So it's all woven together. Brent moves on landscape, and those of us who are working on the Newhouse react to that, and vice versa. So, and the neighborhood is the site, the context for all of that biomimicry work that your DES and consulting staff are doing. So bear with us, there are many things underway. The next slide is just a recap by Matt Alfs on mitigation, not migration, from the earlier minutes. We're focusing physical buildings, site history, and context, social history. We had a very energetic and positive meeting with local representatives of the historic preservation community yesterday, talking about these issues. We get a lot of good input from those in the community who are passionate and conscientious about the state historic resources. So that's well underway. We're looking at salvage and reuse of some of the existing building materials from Newhouse. Again, there's a possibility for some of that material, construction material, to be used in the site or along with signage, wayfinding in around the LCM parcels. So I think since I've talked so fast, I've got you to the point. The next slide, Oliver, is the entree for Miller Hall. They're going to give you just a quick overview view of where we are on Newhouse. Christine, are you there?
Good morning. Thank you, Clarissa. So I think we can go to the next slide, please. So just referencing back to some of our guiding principles, a reminder on schedule, we worked through schematic design ending in February 28th. So we've been on a little bit of a hiatus for design work. We're going to be picking that back up here in the next few weeks and getting deeply into design development. So, we are in a transitional zone between the South Capitol Neighborhood Association, the West Capitol Campus, and just really making sure we're paying attention to scale, proportion, views, neoclassical design principles, creating a timeless building that will be on the site for many, many decades, centuries to come. Next slide, please. We are working very closely with building work on the mitigation component, as Clarissa mentioned. Here are just a few of the goals that we keep in our focus as we move through this project. Next slide, please. And then, as Clarissa mentioned, we have performed an inventory of salvage materials for the existing Newhouse building, and I know that there are further exercises going on right now to understand how those press houses are captured in the historical context and social context of the campus. Next slide, please. A reminder on this axial plan we had shared with you, I believe in our February CDAC meeting, just talking about how Newhouse building really fits into the greater campus scheme and just trying to work through those axial relationships with the other buildings and existing context on site. Next slide, please. So a few things that we heard from you last time, really wanting to zoom out and understand our site as part of the bigger campus context, taking into account the Great Lawn, the Ledge building, the Pritchard existing building and addition, and also capturing the neighborhood to the south. We're also here trying to represent the tree canopy in a more realistic interpretation. So hopefully we can learn a few more things from this site plan scale and exercise as we move forward into design. Next slide, please. We also wanted to revisit a few of the analyses we performed in schematic design, definitely looking at the views and how our building in its new capacity will help frame and orient visitors on campus to the remainder of the site. Next slide, please. We'd also heard from you in February that you were very interested in understanding the pedestrian access on site. So this is an early diagram showing existing context. In blue are the pathways of existing pedestrian movement through the site, including from the pedestrian bridge coming from the east of campus, and really paying attention to the Sherberg, Ledge building, O'Brien circulation capacities on site. Next slide, please. And then similarly, we looked at vehicular access.
Let's pause. Representative Dolan has a question.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I was just typing in the chat box. Is there an easy way to make these slides a little bigger? I have on my brand new glasses and I can't read them at all. And I might be the only one, but I'll be the sacrificial lamb to say that.
Thank you for bringing that up. Hopefully that's a little bit better.
Thank you.
And if we need to revisit anything, or if I'm moving too fast, please slow me down and we can go back. Looking at vehicular pathways across the site, just making sure we're keeping those existing pathways in mind for access to the campus as we move through our next design iteration. I think we can keep going. So, in schematic design, we really we're trying on a few things with the massing of the building as far as how it starts to fit into the context of Sherberg, O'Brien for depth and relief, scale and proportion. So this was an early sketch that starts to help us understand the relationship of the building to the site. We are going to continue on our evaluation of the massing strategies in this next phase of design. Next slide, please. And then materiality, both the existing materiality of Newhouse, how we move that forward, how we really use that to influence our design choices for exterior material palette, and then also looking at our campus inspiration. There's just so much beauty and grandeur on the campus that we really want to make sure we're matching and being appreciative of in our new building material selection. So here are a few the materials on site that really captured our interest. Next slide, please. And then looking towards our new palette, what that might start to shape into, we are exploring using mass timber solutions for our interior floor deck. So you'll see that in the top left picture, where we want to keep exposed wood deck actually in the majority of the project. We're also looking at precast concrete panels, ways that we can work with local manufacturers to find good aggregate matches that will work with the Wilkeson sandstone on campus. Looking at ways we might be able to expose structure, and also how our window trim and window frames might start to match existing window coloration and scale. Bronze is another material we're very interested in pursuing. Brick texture is another option we might be able to incorporate both in the hardscape surface and the vertical surfaces of the new building. And then we've moved away from terracotta. I think after our SD pricing, we understood that terracotta might not be the best option. So we're really refocusing on a precast solution for the exterior. Next slide, please. And then I know Dr. Brooks brought up a question about scale in our last conversation, just making sure that we are really focusing on matching the scale and not exceeding the scale of the insurance building and the Sherberg building. So we've started to evaluate how our building really starts to get situated in the site. I know a few questions came up in our last conversation about grading, building entry, finished floor elevation. So here we're trying to start to diagram and convey that information to the group. And then really looking back to landscape, a great conversation starter from Brent Chapman this morning on the pollinator habitat. So this image here is when we've just been working through the landscape plan with our landscape architect Marassi on existing trees, proposed deciduous trees, and proposed conifers. So that's kind of the color breakdown of this slide. If you could go next, please. And then looking at the overall ground plane, and the different hardscape options and shrub layers that we're trying to incorporate into this site so that we can match to that Greater Olmsted plan and that 2009 master plan. And the next slides, we'll get into a little bit more detail on those. So, and I know we're gonna have to squint on this one, apologies, but if you look down at the bottom right, you can see there's a legend that shows some symbols, and we've gone through our plant selection and really tried to identify the criteria of native planting, pollinator friendly species, and then plant species that are direct recommendations from the Olmsted or the 2009 Historic Landscape Preservation Master Plan. So you can see here, we're doing our best to make sure we're listening to the different stakeholder groups, the different requirements to the site, and just being sensitive to what's appropriate for the Opportunity Site 6. Next slide, please. Here again, we have the tree canopy options that we're looking at in our planting plans. And you can see a similar legend in the bottom right corner. And keep going, please. And then we've done the same exercise for our shrub layers. So really looking at those pollinator friendly species, working with Brent Chapman, working with the Olmsted groups to make sure we're choosing the right species for this site and the right planting plan as well. And I think maybe this starts to play into your question of, if I went to the nursery, what's a great plant species that I could start to incorporate in my own garden? Any questions about any of the shrub selection or tree selection we've shown here? Okay, I think we have a few more slides to cover, and then we'll wrap this one up. Yeah, so similarly, some of those other plant species that we're looking at to really capture the beauty of the campus on our site. Keep going, please. And then another item that we heard in our last conversation with you is, just trying to understand the street relationship to the entry. Wanted to make sure we were being really clear on that. So here Sid Snyder is shown, and then we have that step up to where our potential building entry is for that ground level floor. One thing to note about this diagram, you'll see kind of the darker outline of the trees. Those, so existing tree at present size. So that's kind of what we're assuming is going to be our tree size when planted. And then you fast forward 40 years into the future, you start to see what that tree becomes, right? The grand canopy that it will become over time, right? Because we're not planting mature trees, we're planting smaller trees that will then grow into this larger canopy. So just wanting to make sure we're being realistic about that representation here. And hopefully that's clear to everybody with this section. Next slide, please. And then similarly on the south side of the site, just being realistic about the scale and proportion of that landscaping from 15th into the south parking lot of the site, showing that 10-foot planter strip. It's a low native shrub with ground covers, and then a parking buffer created by both street trees and parking trees that helps to screen that edge. And I think just to reiterate, we keep coming back to the 1928 plan, the 2009 master plan, and making sure that we're really in alignment with what the goals were for this campus as we move forward in the design process. So thank you for listening and for your time today.
Thank
Clarissa,
you.
Is that the end of the presentation?
That's the end of the presentation, Mr. Miles. That was a brilliant recap from Christine Traber of Miller Hall. And we constantly give credit to our DES B&G colleagues who are helping so much on the landscape portion. We also have had a lot of really great benefit from those Olmsted folks, those Olmsted organization people in Seattle and Portland who have given us a lot of counsel and input on it. So happy to field questions, happy to clarify anything, but that's your CDEC recap of LCM work today.
Great, thank you very much, Clarissa. Before we get to comments and questions, and I see Senator Hunt has his hands up, I just want to remind everyone that we did not get any email comments, but we did receive some public comments earlier today. So I'd like to open it up now for committee discussion, and I see Senator Hunt has his hand up. Senator? You are muted.
Well, I sound fine to myself. Sorry about that. Couple questions. Is the footprint for the new building larger than the current one? I couldn't tell. I thought we were looking at something that was going to be larger than the current footprint for new house.
Oh, that's an excellent question. And I'm going to lean on my colleague, Christine Traber, with those details. I'm sure she has them at her fingers. I almost remember the ones we've been talking about this week. The new footprint, Christine, is at 170 in the east-west and 85.
Right. And Oliver, could I ask that you maybe go back to a site plan image if you have it handy? We can talk through that a little bit. Sorry to make.
I was going to ask that and it zipped by too quickly there. So
sorry, yeah. We're sorry. We were on a roll, weren't we, Senator?
Yeah, we were.
Yeah. So if we maybe that first site plan where we have the tree canopy and the bigger, maybe a few more up. And this is fine too. So currently, so existing new house, our footprint is quite a bit bigger than existing new house. I think we're all pretty clear on that. Right. So Senator Hunt, your question is more along the lines of how closely related to this footprint here will the new building be? And we've gone through it.
I think you wanted to make sure that the existing footprint of new house is smaller than what's proposed. Maybe Amy's on the phone.
Yeah, that's close. Yeah.
Some of our people, I'm sure, have those dimensions. Senator Hunt, give us a minute to retrieve the existing dimensions.
I don't need the specific numbers. Yeah. I was just curious on that. And secondly, maybe this is premature, but how are we in designing the building going to take into consideration how workspace and work has changed as a result of COVID and more remote learning and maybe needing different space uses and allocations in a new building?
That comes up often. And I think we've heard from senators and representatives that we need to be thinking very far in the future. So Miller Hall, Hoffman, and DES are considering many different options for the office landscape and the workstation layouts, that kind of thing. I'm not going to go off into a discussion of how many people are on site because we've learned for certain that during session, these buildings will be heavily occupied and very busy. But let me assure you that Miller Hull is bringing very state-of-the-art ideas forward for contemporary interiors, right, Christine? I've set you up. Go ahead, okay?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think there are several different strategies we can evaluate as we move forward with the design development. I think it's crucial that we're meeting the operations and functions for Senate staff and for Senate members in the new building. But I think there is potential flexibility for us to evaluate as we move forward with those layouts.
Good.
And I think we'll work on how we can best answer your question when we meet again with a design development plan.
Thank you.
We're looking up that existing new house footprint dimension right now and hope to have that to you here in a couple minutes.
Great, thank you, Christine and Clarissa. Chris Jones, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Christine, thanks for the presentation. That was fantastic. I had a quick question, and perhaps we could zoom in a little bit on the south side of the building so I could better understand the parking lot configuration a little bit. Are you intending that that's a drop off on the south side of the building? You have a curb tight sidewalk on the south side of the building. Is that functioning as a drop off of sorts?
So currently, this is a secure parking area. We have some access control. You can see there with that gate arm on Columbia Street. So right now that space that's south of the building is really designated as a fire lane. City of Olympia had previously mentioned the need for a 26-foot fire lane along the length of the building. So that drop off, it's something we need to keep considering from an accessibility standpoint, from an equity standpoint. But I think really on the north side of the building on Sid Snyder, Oliver, I'm sorry to ask you, but would you mind scrolling up just slightly? Thank you. You can see, I think there would be potential there on Sid Snyder for a drop-off location with some ADA ramping that could get us up to the front entry point, or on Water Street. But we haven't really delegated a drop-off zone, but that's something that we should definitely talk to our team about a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. The reason I ask, and if we could maybe pan back down again, there's so much focus on this being an edge to the Capitol campus and the neighborhood. And does it make any sense? And we have vehicles that are parking kind of on the south side of our project site, and there's sensitivity about, vehicle lights coming into the neighborhood. If there's any sense in moving the southernmost bay of parking to the north side of this lot and making that landscape a little more significant and richer and kind of more in line with that Olmsted campus edge. It's a circulation discussion that I probably don't know have all the answers for, but just, I don't know if you've looked at that or if you could comment on that at all.
We are tight on the south parking lot, I will tell you that. But it is something that we should investigate a little bit further. You have a wonderful idea, and I would love to discuss that more with our transportation team and our landscape team. I think the good news is we've gained a little bit of space. We've reduced the building footprint by 13 feet in this value engineering exercise that we went through. So I think we actually gain a little bit more space for additional landscaping and potentially shifting that whole lot a little bit closer to the building to gain an increased buffer edge. So that's definitely something we'll explore.
And then I'm going to make one more comment and get off my soapbox real quick. I really appreciate the plant material that you had shared. And I think the building sections through the landscape are really helpful in people understanding kind of the character of the landscape a little bit more. It's always hard for some of us to interpret site plans and what they mean graphically. One quick comment though, I think the plant palette is incredibly useful, and keeping that palette in line with the Olmsted plan is important. I think there is one missing component that I think is worthwhile discussing more, which is not just the individual plant selections, but the character of the landscape and the idea that, I think one thing that the Olmsted's bequeath on all of us landscape architects is this richness of levels of landscape and this kind of richness of, you know, the canopy and the what's below that and the ground cover, and how all these different plants play together, and not just the individual plant species, but kind of the makeup of how they fit in the landscape, and how they kind of create a really rich layered landscape, and not necessarily, you know, they're just individual standalone plants, but there's a composition as well, that I think is worth exploring a little bit more and discussing, especially with the community and all of us, and how that's composed. But thank you for the additional information and the presentation.
Thank you, Chris. I will be sure to share that comment with Marasi, and we'll work on getting that a little bit more better fine-tuned for next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Senator Hunt, do you have another question or comment? You're muted again.
Trying to be nice here. Can you blow that south parking lot up again? Expand it now. Yeah, go down to 15th. So it looks to me like we are closing Water Street access and putting a gate there, and then South Capitol neighborhood folks and others will come in Columbia, go on 15th to get to Water Street. Is that correct?
So currently, and I'm sorry to ask, can you just zoom out just a tad bit?
But that's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the strategy right now, Senator Hunt,
Okay.
to repurpose that Water Street Southwest block for access to secure parking behind Sherburg, adjacent to Pritchard, and access over toward O'Brien. Christine, go ahead.
So part of our scope will be putting in some temporary barriers on the south edge of Water, because we're needing to close off Water on the south end to get that setback on Water Street. And then we are also planning on putting in some access control on the north edge of Water to make that Water Street component kind of controlled access. But Columbia Street remains open. And then, you know, that 15th connection becomes a very important one.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I wanted to ask briefly, and I know there was a fair amount of discussion last meeting about the visual impact of the parking areas on the overall campus plan. And that the demand for parking is so significant at specific times of the year, and then not nearly as significant for other times of the year. What strategies are the team, or is the team kind of utilizing or discussing to provide multiple uses for all these parking areas that would be, you know, car parks for when they need to be car parks, but could they be something else during other times of the year? And is the design team exploring that alternatives?
That's come up several times, and we've heard great suggestions from our neighbors to the south that those drop arm barriers, those security features need to be considered once session is over. We've not gotten into those operational issues yet, Mr. Miles. We know that that needs to be considered. I'm pleased that my colleague Ann Larson is on this, is in the meeting as well, because she and my colleague Ashley Howard are heading up some operationally driven parking work group issues. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but it sure would help for you to give a recap on some of those very issues similar to this that we're looking at long-term.
Yeah, Dan, it's great that you asked the question. And so we're having a lot of internal discussions right now. We actually have several different issues where we have project-related impacts with the modular building and some of the moves and shifts that are happening because of the Legislative Campus Modernization Project. But then we also have things that we're looking at for long-term. And, you know, we're working through a lot of these alternatives. It could be a shuttle bus, it could be better signage for wayfinding. But there's a series of alternatives that we're looking at right now. We're going to be sharing those with some of the tenants that are on campus, but then that larger strategy is going to take some time. We've got to take into consideration that, you know, the way that we go back to work is going to change, and that could impact the way that the tenants are coming back around campus. But as you mentioned, when we get back into session, we're still going to have the same pressures from the legislative tenants, and that's something that's not going to change. So I think we have to come looking at this creatively to find some different solutions, and that's why we're putting our brains together to see what kind of alternatives are going to be out there. And again, it's going to take some time because we've got a lot of things coming at us with coming back to work, different phasings of this construction project, and then an overall strategy of how we look at things. But it's a great question.
Thank you, Anne, for the help.
Yeah, thank you for the response. I also, I do want to suggest that it's not just an operational issue, though. It is a design issue. And I'm just, I guess I want to encourage the design and construction team to think about alternative ways that these areas of the ground plane, to use Christine's term, which are so important, can have multiple uses during different times of the year. So I understand that there's specific operational issues that have to be dealt with, but I also think there's some design opportunities that could actually assist in that. So I wanted to remind people of that. The other thing I wanted to talk about and reiterate is Chris's point on sort of the overall legacy of the landscape design of the old Olmsted brothers, and this sense of hierarchy of both planting materials and circulation paths that were so important to their landscape design approach. And so just reiterate Chris's request that be considered as part of as the design development moves forward on the landscape. And then I did want to ask Brent Anderson a question about schedule and GCCM. Are we looking, or have you guys started to strategize any opportunities for early bid packages to take advantage of some of the, or to try and mitigate some of the issues that Clarissa mentioned early with current market issues in the construction industry?
Yeah, yes, for sure. This is Brent Anderson, Hoffman Construction, and for sure we want to mitigate those cost escalations, specifically with commodities. The prime targets for this one might be electrical gear, mechanical gear. As that gear is or equipment is defined in DD or CD, then we will look at opportunities to early release and lock in the price and the schedule, because we've all seen in this market too, the schedules can change vastly, and so that has its own cost. But yes, good point, good idea, and we are looking at those.
Great, thank you, Mr. Anderson. Representative Dolan.
Thank you. So give me some examples of how those parking lots could be used for different functions when we don't need them for parking lots like during the summer. I don't quite understand how you change the function of a parking lot, and there's probably all sorts of architectural creative ways to do that, but could you give me some examples?
Are you addressing that to me?
I mean, a couple of people have mentioned that we can have different uses for that space when we don't need all the parking for session.
So
what
other
would be other uses?
Yeah, other hardscape functions could be as outdoor play space, for instance, right?
Or farmers market is one I've seen.
Farmers markets. I don't have a list off the top of my head, Representative Dolan, but
those two examples help me understand what you're talking about. Thank you.
Oh, good. Any other questions or comments?
I just want to make sure that Christine or Bill caught it already. Senator Hunt left us a message, Christine, regarding the next meeting. So if we could capture that and make sure we respond appropriately. Thank you, Senator Hunt, for your questions and comments.
Great. Well, if there's no further committee discussion, I would remind the committee today that this was an informational item on the agenda. There's no action required by CDAC today. And I want to thank Clarissa and the entire DES team and the consultant team for a great update. It's really exciting to see this moving forward. And we're excited to see the design development phase take shape.
Thank you
you
so
very
much. It's a privilege. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
With that, we'll move on to our next update, agenda item 6, the executive residence security improvements. I'd like to invite Matt Jones and Bob Williard from Enterprise Services to provide an update on planned security improvements at the executive residence.
Thank you, Chair Miles. Good morning, everybody. For those who have not met me yet, my name is Matt Jones. I'm the new Assistant Director for DES Capital Security and Visitor Services. Unfortunately, Bob is out of the office this week, so I'll be giving the presentation. In the biennial budget, we were funded for security improvements for the executive residence. One project is related to video surveillance and lighting, and the other project is relating to fencing, gates, and bollards. This project is still in design. And for some background and context, over the last several years, we've seen an increase in unauthorized or breaches into the executive residence grounds. On January 6th, you all will probably remember, we did have a group of armed individuals who did gain unlawful entry onto the residence grounds and was able to get up to the front door. Some of the gates. DES since then has mitigated some of the risks, but this project certainly helps further mitigate unlawful entry into those grounds. These enhancements generally include a new embassy style fencing, which we'll show in the next slide, high-speed crash-rated gates and bollards at the driveway entry, including an increase in the number and types of video surveillance cameras and lighting around the perimeter. Next slide, please. So here you see an example of the perimeter fencing that's moving forward in design. It's a 10-foot embassy style fence. It articulates up at the top, facing outward. The gates would be integrated into this fence design and would go around the entire exterior of the property. The property currently has 6-foot wrought iron style fencing on the east and north sides, and then chain link style fencing around the west and the south side. This will certainly enhance the security and safety of the residents, and is a style of anti-climb fencing. So with that, given the security nature of this topic, it's a high-level overview, and happy to address any questions that this committee might have.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Appreciate the information you are able to share. Is there any committee discussion or questions? Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Dan. Matt, I had a quick question. I think, my job is to make sure that the character of the campus is maintained and security and aesthetics aren't always aligned, if you will, with one another. And I recognize the importance of security. Is there been any discussions or strategy to, mitigate the kind of visual aesthetic imposition of security measures like gates? And maybe you could talk to, what considerations you need for visibility and safety relative to fencing and secure perimeters and that sort of thing. And if there is a kind of a balance between aesthetics and some landscaping and keeping your surveillance and visibility, correct to your standards?
That's a great question, and I thank you for that. It is something that we have adopted into how we deploy security technologies and physical security measures across the campus. We utilize a multitude of different approaches to get to what you're talking about. So things that we look at, and we're doing the same things as it ties into the legislative campus modernization project as well, related to crime prevention through environmental design. So using aspects of landscape vegetation to create natural barriers, using boulders and different things like that is a means of preventing vehicular attacks. Multitude of different things like that. How high vegetation is. We use a typical 3 to 6 foot rule. So we want to keep the vegetation lower than 3 feet or pruned up taller than 6 feet. So we create natural sight lines, gives people the feeling that they're safe, secure, can see what may be around them, but blending that with the great aspects that this campus offers, the historic nature, the Olmsted Plan, and others. We also use a variety of security technologies as well to help mitigate vegetation issues and other type aspects through video surveillance cameras. So there is in this project a blend that we're certainly working through on it. So we keep the grounds, mostly intact, have a nice setback away from them so that security and law enforcement professionals can do the work that they're doing, but not have it feel that the fencing and other type of security products are right out there in your face and visible necessarily. There is a blend to it where we do want to make sure that people understand it is a restricted area, but also seem warm and inviting at the same time. So it's a delicate balance.
Yeah, it's definitely a delicate balance. As a follow-up to that too, are there other products? This is kind of a two-part question. Are there other products that have ever been explored to meet these requirements, or has there ever been a custom architecturally designed solution that may not be an off-the-shelf solution? There's inevitably a cost associated with that, but there's also a return on investment relative to maintaining aesthetics when you aren't exclusively committed to an off-the-shelf product.
Yeah, we've reviewed a number of different approaches and products within this project. Ultimately, the consultants on the project and our partners with the Washington State Patrol, who are tasked with providing law enforcement and security services for the executive residence and the governor, this ultimately became the recommended solution, given the incidents that we've seen over time and its use in other areas protecting high-level executive politicians.
Understood. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Hey, Matt, as a follow-up to Chris's question, is there a landscape architect or some sort of historic preservation consultant on the design team that is reviewing alternatives for these security improvements?
There is a landscape consultant attached to this project. KMB is the architect on this work, and they have a landscape consultant. Brent has also been brought in to consult. So as we're looking at things, we want to make sure we're keeping as many trees as possible. We're keeping the vegetation. And then as we put new physical security measures in place, that we're also providing some additional landscape enhancements into the project.
Great, thank you. Chris, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, Matt, maybe this isn't for today, but I'm wondering if we could get an update maybe at a later date where there's maybe a plan included in your presentation showing the extent of the fencing and perhaps a section, to Dan's point, showing, you know, the condition on the public side and the private side, so we could understand how that's being installed and what that public facing condition looks like.
Absolutely, we can do that at a high level and provide that at a future meeting once the design progresses a little further.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Is there any other committee discussion or questions? Okay, thank you very much. Another reminder that this is also a no action item on CDAC's agenda today. It was informational only. Again, thank you to Matt and the entire Enterprise Services team and the consulting team working on this project for providing us with the update. And then the last agenda item today, looks like we're going to wrap up a little early, is information about upcoming meetings for the State Capitol Committee or the Capitol Campus Design Advisory Committee are located on the website for each committee. These websites include up-to-date meeting information, including meeting dates and starting times. Enterprise Services will post meeting agendas, minutes, and meeting packets on these websites as they become available. As a reminder, the meeting schedule is posted. The next SCC meeting will be Thursday. That can't be right, not March 17th, June 16th, 2022. And the next CDAC meeting will be Thursday, September 15th, 2022. These meetings are still planned to be held via remote access. Please be sure to visit the State Capitol Committee or Capitol Campus websites, CDAC websites, to stay up to date on current information. Is there any further discussion needed by the committee today? Having heard no requests, I now adjourn the meeting, today's meeting, and wish you all a very good day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.